Welcome, everybody. My name's Andrew Copson. I'm the Chief Executive of Humanists UK, and it's absolutely delightful to be asked to chair this event today when we'll be discussing this wonderful new report, which, if you haven't read it already, you've got a treat in store. And if you have, you know what I'm talking about when I say how good it is. So Humanists UK has been around for 130 years, protecting the interests and fighting for the rights of the non-religious particularly, but really for all of society, because we want to see a better world where freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, and freedom of choice will be available for every person. In the world that we live in, however, organisations have to confine and be selective about the campaigns that they run. And so Humanists UK has focused on the rights, particularly of non-religious people. And we'll be talking today about a very specific group of non-religious people who are the non-religious in our asylum system here in the UK. Before we get into that, some brief housekeeping. Our speaker presentations are going to be recorded today for publication after the event, but not the question and answer session. The question and answer function you can find at the bottom of your screen. When we get to that part, I'll invite you to click to ask your questions and we'll be able to address them. The structure of the session today is that we're going to start with a couple of speakers who are going to talk about the context in which this report has been published. Then we're going to hear the research findings from Lucy Potter herself, and we'll have some panel questions and answers. Now, the research that we're going to be hearing about today was done collaboratively by Lucy Potter with Humanists UK, combining her own research experience and expertise on non-religious asylum claims with the experience of Humanists UK's own on-the-ground staff that are supporting freedom of belief. And it reflects a shared commitment. This is why I'm so happy to be here today. It reflects our shared commitment to freedom of religion and belief and to understanding the real world experiences of people as the people who really need support in that context as they navigate the UK asylum system, particularly those facing persecution for leaving religious groups. We're really pleased with that collaborative approach. We think that it has made these findings both academically robust, as Lucy's research I'm sure always would have been, but also practically relevant for policymakers, practitioners, and other civil society organisations. I think, if Lucy doesn't mind her blushes, I think it is a silver star example of how it's good for academics and NGOs to work together to the benefit of both. And she's been an impeccable example of a researcher who, while at the same time being extremely rigorous, has kept her eyes on the practical implications of her work for real people. And I think that there's much credit to her for that. So we're going to start with a contribution from Lizzi Collinge, who is the Member of Parliament for Morecambe and Lunesdale and the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Humanist Group. Then we're going to hear from Donna Crane, who works to support people who leave high control religions and particularly people who make asylum claims here at Humanists UK. Then Lucy's going to present her research. And then we'll hear later from Jamie, who I don't think is here just yet, but will be joining us. He's an immigration lawyer at Duncan Lewis Solicitors with expertise in this area, specific expertise in this area. But let's start with Lizzi Collinge, chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Humanist Group and my favourite Member of Parliament.
I bet you say that to all the MPs, Andrew.
It's recorded, it's recorded.
It's really wonderful to be here. I really appreciate Lucy and you all inviting me to be here. I think it is this research is going to contribute to a really important ongoing debate. First of all, an apology. I'm not going to be able to stay for the whole session as I had planned, but a very last minute debate has come forward on oil and gas, and I'm a member of the Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee, so I have to be there. Sorry. But as the current chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Humanist Group, freedom of religion or belief is central to the work we're doing across Parliament and across parties. So for those who don't know, all-party parliamentary groups have to be made up of people from different parties. The Humanist Group is, I think, the second largest all-party parliamentary group. It's a very long-standing group and it's got really strong representation from the different parties. Now, my work in Parliament obviously tries to be evidence-based, and so actually having really good quality research like this that is not only academically relevant, but relevant to the very live policy discussions that we're having right at this moment is so important, because unless we take evidence to inform our policies, we will get them wrong, both in writing them, but also then in operating them, which is obviously the most important thing. How does it actually work in reality? So Lucy's research is focusing on what is the reality in the asylum system as we see it. And the reality is that non-religious belief-based asylum claims are frequently misunderstood. The level of knowledge of non-religious bases for claiming asylum very poorly understood, and often very poor decisions are made, despite the fact that quite clearly any decision that we get wrong in the asylum system can have catastrophic impacts on individuals and on communities. So in my role as chair, along with the rest of the group, we have spoken to apostates. We've spoken to people who have left religions, particularly high control religions. We have met people like Mubarak Bala who have been imprisoned, who have been treated dreadfully simply for having a belief system that is non-religious, simply for not adhering to the predominant belief system, and simply for speaking their mind. I'm very pleased that Mubarak's now safe in Germany, because for a very long time he was not safe. And his story is just an exemplar of many across the world. And so this report really is critical for feeding into that asylum system and the policies that we have. As a government, we believe in international human rights obligations. But there is an ongoing debate about how we work our asylum system and legal migration system, which is obviously a different subject. But we are also looking at how we support freedom of religion or belief across the world. Now, we have a special envoy, David Smith, who is very good, actually, at being very non-denominational when it comes to freedom of religion or belief, and looking at where non-religion or apostasy is contributing to people's lack of safety or freedom across the world. So my main takeaway really from the research that Lucy's done is that we really need to centralize the experiences of people who are fleeing persecution due to leaving a religion or not having a religion, their experiences with our asylum system as well. Make sure policies recognize that not everyone has the same experience of a country. So there have been discussions about labeling certain countries as safe. Now, a country might be safe for 95% of its population and not safe for 5% of its population. And obviously, asylum claims are done individually, and I've had assurances from ministers that that will always continue to be the case. But I'm concerned that if we deem certain countries safe, we miss people like Mubarak. We miss people who are not safe in their countries simply because they've left a religion or simply because they hold a belief system that is non-religious. So part of the work that I want to do in Parliament is to make sure that that is central to the discussions we're having around asylum claims. So thank you again, Lucy, for providing this really, really strong evidence base that myself and my colleagues can take forward into those parliamentary discussions, and hopefully get an asylum system that works, that is fair, and that protects the most vulnerable. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lizzie, for that. I think it's wonderful to have, if I might say so, just because you are one of my favourite MPs, it is wonderful to have MPs that value the role of evidence in policy making. I know that's been a hallmark of your approach. And I think it's especially in the days that we live in now when refugees and asylum is becoming such a overheated topic in our national conversation, fueled by the media, yes, but also fueled by politicians, that we do have a space for evidence making in spite of that to cut through all that noise. So Lucy has definitely given you the ammunition that you need to fight for that evidence-based approach, as you say. Our next speaker is going to be Donna Crane. Donna will introduce herself, I'm sure, but she's one of our wonderful team here at Humanist UK.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Lucy, for inviting me to come along. And thank you, Lizzie, for the points that you've made, particularly about that difference between the experience of 5% of a population compared to the rest of the population. So my name is Donna Crane, and I am the Support and Advocacy Services Manager for Humanists UK. Essentially, what that means is that my role has two parts, really. One of them is I manage our faith to faithless services. So we support people who are based in the UK and who have left controlling religions. We do that via a helpline, peer support, and ongoing email communications and in-person socials. Another key element of the work that I do, and I think the reason why I'm here speaking today, is the support that we do for people seeking asylum based on their well-found fear of persecution relating to their non-religious beliefs. Mainly what that support looks like is we will write a person a letter that speaks in great detail about their worldview, about their current situation, and about their fears of persecution if they were returned to the country, their country of origin. So I believe that my role is to read out a deeply emotional letter from one of my volunteers who sought asylum after leaving Saudi Arabia. So I'll just get started with that, shall I? Just bear with me. Just got to find it. There we go. Okay, I'm going to move you all there so I can see that and that. Okay, so this is an anonymous person. And it is about their experiences of seeking asylum after leaving religion. This statement is being delivered anonymously on my behalf, so I'm speaking in this person's own words, as a woman who sought asylum after leaving my religion. Although I have been granted asylum in the United Kingdom, I continue to fear for my safety as an apostate and for the safety of my family who remain in the country I come from. For many apostates, the fear does not end when we reach safety. It follows us, shapes our choices, and limits our voices long after we have left. I would like to begin by thanking the organisers for giving me the opportunity to share my experiences as part of this important work. I come from a country where religion is not simply a personal belief, but something enforced both through law and society. Leaving Islam is criminalised and can carry severe punishment. It also exposes individuals to serious harm from family and community, often without protection. My journey away from religion began at university when I was exposed for the first time to scientific study and critical thinking. Until then, my education has almost been entirely religious. Learning to question, to seek evidence, to think independently opened a door for me that I could not close. Over time, this led me to question my beliefs and eventually to leave my religion. I still remember the moment I realised I no longer believed. What I felt was not relief, but fear. The sudden awareness that despite having harmed no one, I could now face severe punishment simply for my thoughts had changed. From that moment, I understood that my life would never be the same again. I was living in a system that imposed strict control over my life as a woman, including legal restrictions on my ability to leave the country. This meant I was effectively trapped, and hiding my beliefs became my only option. Living in hiding was deeply isolating. I could not speak openly to anyone, and even attempting to connect with others like me carried risks. I felt that as though I was existing rather than living. Over time, this constant fear and isolation took a profound toll on my mental health. I felt disconnected from myself, from others, and from reality. The decision to leave my home and seek asylum was one of the most difficult and painful decisions I've ever made. It meant accepting that I might never return, and that I would lose my family, my community, and everything familiar to me. But after my lack of belief became known within my community, the danger became too great, and I had no choice but to leave. I came to the United Kingdom hoping for safety and the ability to live freely. However, the asylum process itself was extremely challenging. I waited 2 years for my case to be heard, far longer than I had been led to expect. During that time, I was not allowed to work, which left me in a difficult financial situation, at times unable to meet my basic needs. I was unable to leave the country. During this period, my father was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and I was unable to see him due to these restrictions. This is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. The interview process was particularly difficult. I was asked to speak about deeply personal and traumatic experiences in an environment where I often felt disbelieved. Some of the questions did not reflect my experience, and at times it felt as though there was a lack of understanding of what it means to leave Islam, specifically. Despite requesting an interpreter, I was not provided with one, which added further stress and difficulty. Overall, the process was re-traumatizing. It brought back fears and experiences that I had struggled to overcome, and it left a lasting impact on my mental health. Even now, years after being granted asylum, I continue to live with the effects of that trauma. This is why this research is so important. For many of us, experiences like mine can feel invisible and misunderstood. This report reflects those experiences with accuracy and care. It highlights the gap between policy and lived reality and draws attention to the specific challenges faced by people seeking asylum on the basis of leaving their religion. It gives a voice to people who are often unheard and provides an opportunity for those involved in the asylum system to better understand the realities behind these cases. I hope these findings will contribute to a more informed, compassionate, and humane approach, one that recognises the complexity of non-religious identity and the very real risks that can come with it. Because ultimately, this is about the fundamental rights to freedom of thought and belief, including the right not to believe and the ability to live without fear. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Donna. I know that stories and testimonies and experiences like that are bread and butter to you, unfortunately, in the role that you do, both domestically and from asylum applicants. But that was a very valuable added perspective to this discussion here, reminding us of the real people whose lives are at stake in this. Thank you very much. Now it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Lucy Potter to present the findings of her report, the key findings of her research, and also I think outline as a consequence of those findings some of the implications for decision making before we then come to wider discussion. So, Dr. Potter, take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Andrew. I'll just start by sharing my screen. Hopefully it goes okay. And thank you so much, Lizzie, for your kind words. And thank you, Donna, and especially to that person who wrote that statement, and they know who they are. Can you just tell me if you can see my presentation? Great. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome for being here at the launch of this report, Freedom of Religion or Belief for All. During the fieldwork for my research, a lawyer told me something very simple about the asylum system. If you're believed, you are allowed in. I then went on to meet people seeking asylum who have spent years of their lives trying to explain something that sounds simple, that they no longer believe in the religion they were born into. They've been asked to pinpoint the exact moment they stopped believing what philosophical arguments convinced them, and why they could not simply return home and stay silent about their views. Many had no documents to prove their disbelief, no community leaders able to verify their identity, and often little language to describe what is, for them, a deeply personal transition. And today we'll take a look at these issues with an often overlooked group within the UK asylum system, people persecuted for having no religious beliefs, including atheists, agnostics, humanists, and others who have left their religion. And I will show how gaps in asylum policy, misunderstandings of apostasy, and the credibility assessment combine to create unique barriers to protection for non-religious people who are seeking safety to be themselves and freedom from religion. So today I'll start by providing some background and context for the report. I'll explain what freedom of religion or belief means, outline the global context of non-religious based persecution, and highlight the implications that this has on asylum protection. Next, I'll introduce the research project and methodology that was behind the study, and then I'll walk you through some of the key findings in a bit more detail. So I'll talk about the gaps in asylum policy, what the misunderstandings of apostasy are, issues with the credibility assessment, as well as the burden of proof on claimants. And lastly, I'll share some policy recommendations and conclude by outlining the steps that we hope to take to support non-religious asylum claimants going forward. So, freedom of religion or belief is enshrined in several human rights laws. It includes not only the freedom to have a religion, but also the freedom to change religion, to leave religion, or have no religion at all. And in the current global context, there are widespread restrictions on the right to form, which often extend to the suppression of non-religious identities. And in fact, Humanists International say that nearly half of the world's countries maintain active laws against blasphemy or apostasy. And to define these, blasphemy is a charge that is given to causing offence to religion, and apostasy is the term given to individuals who leave a religion, and this can include both religious conversion as well as those who have no religious affiliation. And the stakes here are incredibly high. So globally, the death penalty is enforced in approximately 12 nations. 65 countries have prison sentences, and these range from a few months to life imprisonment. And in 19 more countries, they impose fines or other civic restrictions that discriminate against the non-religious. So, for example, the non-religious can be denied passport or identification documents, which will prevent them from getting jobs, from traveling, as well as in laws that prevent non-religious people from marrying particular partners, as well as in laws that affect their parental rights. And these laws and restrictions have far-reaching effects. So, in addition to directly discriminating against the non-religious, simply being accused of apostasy or blasphemy can put your life at risk before any criminal trial is able to take place. Individuals who are labelled as blasphemous often struggle to find legal representation, and in many countries, the primary threat is non-state actors, for example, mobs, extremist groups, or even family members. And so, in effect, many are forced to hide their beliefs or continue to conform to practices. And so, violations of freedom of religion or belief affect everyone, including people with a religion, those who reject religion, and anybody accused as being such. And so, although religious persecution is common across all religions and beliefs, when humanists, for example, are a target of persecution, a former special rapporteur in FORB has reported that they face attacks more viciously and brutally than any other religious groups. And so, despite all these risks posed against non-religious people or even those accused of blasphemy, there remain significant gaps in asylum policy and practice by the UK government offering protection to non-religious people. And so while international law clearly protects the freedom not to believe, both academic research and asylum policy has largely focused on religion-based asylum claims that involve persecution of religious minorities or cases of religious conversion. Existing research on religion-based asylum claims are assessed then through visible forms of belief or a visible form of a religious identity. And as a result, experiences of persecution that are linked to non-religion remain comparatively under-examined and then less conceptually visible. Asylum policy frameworks in the UK also mirror this focus. So, religious persecution is typically understood through three recognisable categories: religious identity, religious conversion, or belonging to a minority faith group. Decision-making guidance, therefore, look for visible markers of belief. So, things like participation, affiliation, knowledge, or recognition within a community. And although these markers may work for religious claims, and that's not to suggest that religion-based asylum claims are any more easier to claim or straightforward, because they're not. These markers translate very poorly onto non-religious identities. So for someone who has left a religion, their identity is then often defined by the absence of these markers. And so as a result, this lack of inclusion within policy leaves non-religious applicants with one of the weakest protections. By doing so, this creates an uncertainty with decision makers and caseworkers who work for the Home Office as what counts as evidence and what counts as credibility in these cases. And then decision makers with the lack of explicit information of non-religion in these policies, they're then left to draw on their own personal assumptions about what a credible case ought to look like. And so given these conceptual and policy gaps, my research asks how non-religious asylum claims are actually understood and produced within the UK asylum system. There were three main research questions that guided the project. So first, how is the right to be non-religious conceptualized within international human rights law, and specifically through Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? And then to what extent are these translated or reflected in Home Office national asylum policies? Second, are there then gaps between official guidance and then what is happening in decision making in practice? And third, I wanted then to explore the lived experiences of people who have faced persecution and have then navigated the asylum system on these grounds. And to explore these questions, I adopted a qualitative, multi-level methodology, which was designed to capture both the formal structures of asylum governance, as well as then the lived experiences of people as they navigated through them. And this involved two main methods. First, document analysis, so of international human rights law, as well as national asylum policies. And these included the assessing credibility guidance, as well as the guidance about how to conduct asylum interviews. And these are publicly accessible on the UK Home Office website. And second, I then conducted semi-structured and in-depth interviews with refugees. So this included 12 refugees in total. 10 were men and 2 women. And I also interviewed 22 human rights advocates. And these people were professionals working in freedom of religion or belief, as well as apostasy related cases. And it included legal professionals, as well as staff and volunteers for charities, as well as activists. And so with all that set out, I'll now turn to some of the findings that I outline in the report. So when we look at the Home Office's own guidance, including its asylum policy instructions, so I'll call these APIs for short, and their country policy and information notes, which are known as CPINs, the gap of protection for non-religious people is startling. So guidance doesn't adequately distinguish non-religious apostasy from religious conversion. Non-religion is rarely named explicitly, for example, by differentiating between different identities like atheist, agnostic, and humanist. And non-religion is often collapsed into the broader categories of religion as well as apostasy. And so non-religion isn't treated as a distinct identity in its own right. The unique dynamics then of a non-religious identity are therefore absent, and non-religious apostasy is framed through a lens that's designed for religious groups. So as I've just explained. And so, in effect, there's no clear framing in Home Office guidance about how non-religious identity is formed, how it is lived, as well as how it becomes a risk. Now, the Home Office also draw on the C-pins. These are produced by the Home Office themselves to document human rights violations in countries to then guide them in their decision making. Out of the 46 country-specific notes with nations that have apostasy or blasphemy laws, only 2 explicitly mention the non-religious. And these are only referred to as atheists, and these countries are Bangladesh and Iraq. There are more countries that violate FORB. To give you an example, this is Saudi Arabia and the Maldives that have apostasy and blasphemy laws. They have no specific guidance on non-religious persecution at all. And so as a result, caseworkers and decision makers are often then left to rely on their own judgment about what countries they think are safe. And then this does lead to real inconsistencies across decisions. So in some cases, the use of credibility assessment techniques aren't well suited to the realities of non-religious identities, which I'll come on to next. And shockingly, participants from a refugee background also reported to me that they were misunderstood or unrecognized. So as Zain explains, a refugee from Pakistan, he quotes, "First of all, it started right in the morning. In the religion section, she had already ticked Islam because of my name." And Zane's experience demonstrates how gaps in a policy then allow for these assumptions to be made about religious identity. And so, following the gaps we see in these official policies and written guidance, non-religious apostasy is also frequently misunderstood in practice, and so in the asylum interviews. And I want to turn now to what participants from refugee backgrounds told me about their experiences of becoming apostates. So one of the clearest findings was that pathways out of religion were incredibly diverse. There was rarely a single moment of change, almost never a neat or linear journey of deconversion. Many participants grew up in highly religious environments where leaving religion carried social and legal consequences. They described public shaming, intimidation, and in some cases, severe violence directed at people perceived as apostates or blasphemers. And so some remained what they described as in the closet, while in their country of origins to carefully hide their doubts, and some would have to mask their non-religious beliefs or doubts in fear of repercussions. Others only began questioning or changing their beliefs after arriving to the UK, for example, fleeing persecution or even coming as legitimate reasons like work or university. And so non-religious identities were sometimes developed much later on in their life. And so identities were complex and constantly evolving. Participants used a range of identities, some being humanist, agnostic, atheist, or apostate. Some people preferred the term blasphemer. Sometimes these terms were used interchangeably, and sometimes people rejected fixed labels altogether. They were also not straightforward transitions. So instead, they were often messy, iterative processes, and accompanied by immense emotional distress and times of deep identity crisis. So for many participants, like Tariq from the Maldives, apostasy was experienced as a fragmented and deeply traumatic journey. He explained to me that before identifying as non-religious, he became severely depressed. He didn't want to ever let go of his religion, and doing so fundamentally disrupted his entire understanding of the world. And you can imagine how difficult that is when you're then presented in an asylum interview or to a border guard where you have to then articulate your identity very clearly. And so, what emerges here is a significant disconnect between the lived experience of losing one's religion and the institutional expectation that applicants present a tidy and logical and consistent narrative. Mia, an immigration lawyer, described what many non-religious claimants face during asylum interviews. She quotes, "So they will ask questions about what prompted you. There will be a coming out story. What happened? Why don't you believe anymore? If a person claims to have been enlightened, they must name the usual suspects, which are Dawkins and Nietzsche. Then they go completely random and off piece and ask you things as to whether you drink alcohol and have you ever had pork." And this quote really highlights the kind of structured expectation that applicants are then up against. Interviewers are expecting a tidy coming out story with named figures or influences, and then these also tend to be coming from a Euro-American standpoint or a localized understanding of what a non-religious person would act like. And the result is that non-religious claimants are at risk of being misunderstood or misjudged if their lived experiences of apostasy don't match these institutional templates of what belief or disbelief should look like. And so this disconnect between lived experience and institutional expectations become particularly visible during the credibility assessment stage. So the credibility assessment is widely recognised as the most decisive point in the refugee status determination process and one of the most common grounds for asylum refusal. UK asylum policy makes clear that simply claiming to hold beliefs that may lead to persecution is not enough. Applicants are expected to demonstrate knowledge of what the guidance describes as the core elements of the religion or belief they profess to hold. In practice, this means that decision makers are asked to assess whether a claimant genuinely adheres to a belief system, how those beliefs are expressed both privately and publicly, and whether this will place them at risk if returned to their country of origin. And as a result, caseworkers look for structured belief systems, visible behaviors aligned to non-religion, and look for a coherent personal narrative of the rejection of religion. And these are patterns that closely resemble religious conversion stories. But as we've seen, many journeys into non-religion do not follow this kind of clear or linear path. They're often gradual, maybe internal, and very deeply personal processes that are hard to comprehend even for the person going through it. And the guidance therefore carries an implicit assumption that belief is continuous, that it can be demonstrated, and that it's consistent. And I think that these assumptions sit uneasily with the experiences of many apostates whose identities are frequently evolving and shaped by uncertainty. And so, if credibility assessments already rely on assumptions about what belief should look like, the way credibility is evaluated in practice creates additional problems for non-religious claimants. So, credibility assessments are based on the subjective measures, and this is what's outlined in the Home Office policies. Things like plausibility, consistency, level of detail, and perceived genuineness. And while this criteria applies across all asylum claims, these can be particularly difficult to apply for non-religion. So unlike many religions, there is no equivalent core set of beliefs for atheism, for example, or other non-religious identities. And this makes it far less clear what a credible case should look like. As one lawyer, Samuel, explained to me, the policies can appear perfectly reasonable on paper, but the interviews themselves are often discriminatory in practice, shaped by underlying assumptions about how beliefs should be expressed or demonstrated. And although official guidance discourages knowledge-based questions, participants have reported to me that it continues to occur. And in fact, one lawyer told me that it was inevitable because of these credibility indicators. So, in a well-known case that will be familiar for people who have followed Humanists UK's work, is a Pakistani humanist who was asked to name ancient Greek philosophers who were presumed to have humanist belief systems. His case was initially refused because he could not name Aristotle or Plato, despite the irony that actually both figures were themselves religious. And more broadly, in this research, applicants describe being asked to reconstruct very detailed accounts of their childhood beliefs, identify the precise moments when their worldview changed, to explain quite in-depth moral or ethical systems that they now follow now that they've left a religion. Some are also expected to provide very sophisticated theological critiques of religion, and not just about the religion that they had left personally, of all religions. So why have they rejected all religions and the reasons for that? They're also asked to document evidence of, for example, public activism, but that again doesn't always show the true reality of people who become apostates, who don't then take a new role as an activist or being confident and feeling safe enough to publicly express these beliefs. And so non-religious people also face major challenges, not only in giving their oral testimony in the interview, but also in trying to provide evidence to support their claim. And so while all people fleeing persecution don't have the time or resources to gather documents before fleeing, apostates and non-religious people can face a heightened evidential burden. And so they must do two things at once. First, they need to show the sincerity of their non-religion, which, as we've discussed, can be something that's internal. And second, they need to demonstrate their risk of persecution. So they need to show that actors in their country of origin would actually know about or be able to infer their apostasy. And a human rights advocate I interviewed told me that they describe this as a structural problem within the British asylum system. As Miriam put it, the culture of the Home Office is there to turn people down at the end of the day. There are certain grounds which I think the asylum assessors are kind of belligerent towards, nuanced cases and nuanced belief systems that they don't understand. And so, with all that in mind, the question becomes, what can we do going forward? So, in this report, and there's more findings and recommendations in there, so we do encourage you to go and read it. But I set out a series of evidence-based recommendations aimed at strengthening Home Office asylum policy and their practice in asylum decision-making. And so in brief, I'll just discuss some of the recommendations of the findings I have spoke about today. So firstly, the Home Office need to update their asylum policies. So in all the relevant asylum policy instructions and the country policy and information notes need to explicitly recognise the forms of persecution that are faced by non-religious individuals. This would ensure that non-religion is treated with the same clarity and the same legitimacy as other protected beliefs under freedom of religion or belief. Second, staff training. Mandatory training should be introduced for all Home Office staff on updated policies, so assessments of non-religious claims can be consistent and informed. I think this training needs to move away from expecting fixed or linear narratives and to recognise, the real lived experience of what apostates actually deal with. Humanists UK has previously contributed to Home Office training in this area, and expanding this collaboration would be an important step forward. Third, adjusting the burden of proof. So, decision-making processes need to better recognise that there are specific practical challenges that non-religious people face when gathering their evidence, particularly when when the claim concerns an internal conviction. Or they need to better understand that it is difficult to gather evidence, and so credibility shouldn't be affected. And fourth, credibility assessments need to be revised, and the training also needs to be improved for these. So, asylum interviews need to focus on applicants' lived experiences rather than these knowledge-based testings or posing interviewees with trivia-based questioning. And I think that this would also improve the process to be more fair and closely aligned with how non-religious identities are actually experienced. And I think it's also an important moment to be getting this right. People with no religious affiliation are now the world's third largest religious category and one of the most fastest growing. And at the same time, we have laws that are suppressing non-religious identities, with 57% of the global population having some kind of blasphemy law in place. And with, as we spoke about, with asylum being such a an important topic politically, it is, and with asylum reforms, it is really important to act now. And so, to bring my section to a conclusion, immigration and asylum in particular consistently ranks among the most pressing issues facing the UK. And I think that makes it one of the areas where effective government management really matters. A robust and fair asylum system isn't just good policy, it is in the shared interest of the public, of people seeking protection, as well as civil servants who are tasked to administering it. To meet its legal obligation, or for the UK to meet its legal obligation under the Refugee Convention, the Home Office needs assessment procedures that do reflect the full diversity of contemporary asylum claims, including freedom of religion or belief. During the writing of this report in November 2025, the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood announced Labour's proposed renewed asylum reforms. And I can see Jamie's joined us, so he can talk more about this after. I'm now going to move, amongst other changes, to a 30-month core protection status, as well as having a reassessment of claims every few years. Permanent settlement is also going up to nearly 20 years. And while these reforms do not directly reference non-religious asylum claims, they are likely to have a serious implication. So non-religious claimants could face greater risks as current policies still fail to recognise their distinct experiences of persecution. For example, countries that are deemed secular on paper may still be unsafe in practice. And in short, without changes now to policies and practice that explicitly account for non-religious claims, applicants are going to be continued to be disadvantaged by asylum reforms and by a system that ultimately struggles to recognise, understand, and fairly assess their experiences. And so my research highlights the urgent need for asylum assessment processes that are truly inclusive of all belief systems, ensuring that non-religious perspectives are considered on an equal footing to religious ones. I'm deeply grateful for the ESRC who funded this report, to Humanists UK and Faith to Faithless for their ongoing support and encouragement, to my PhD supervisors who looked over this doctoral research, as well as my fellowship mentor looking over the consolidation of my PhD research. And above all, thanks to the participants who generously shared their personal stories with me, and without them, this work would not have been possible. Building on this research, later this year, we'll also be producing a practical toolkit and best practice guide. The aim of this is to create an accessible and public report toolkit to support fair, ethical, and consistent decision making, as well as providing a foundation for ongoing training for the Home Office to develop their policies, and as well as supporting practitioners who may work in refugee supporting organisations as well. If you'd like to contribute or to engage with this resource, please do reach out to me directly by email. You should have also received a Google form link via Eventbrite. And I'll also try and put it into the chat as well. And technology permitting, it should also appear in your browser after the event ends for anyone who wants to fill it out. And so thank you for your time and attention today. I'll pass it back over now to Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Potter, for that wonderful explanation of this report. I've been asked to very briefly respond from Humanists UK's point of view before we come to Jamie, who's now joined us. Welcome, Jamie. And I won't detain us for very long because I think there'll be plenty of plenty of questions for the panel. But I just wanted to say that this research is groundbreaking, and we were very pleased to have collaborated with Lizzi on this. It does provide a very rigorous examination of the barriers that are facing non-religious asylum seekers today. And its findings are very stark. I mean, we know this, operating our own service that supports people who leave high control religions, not just within the UK, but within the asylum system. But its findings are stark, I think, to those who aren't intimately involved in that world. And they do remind us that, in particular, we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that the non-religious are understood by policymakers, not just in this field, to be fair, but in a range of areas in public life. We do provide support at Humanists UK for refugees who are seeking asylum on the basis that they'd be persecuted for their non-religious beliefs in their country of origin. We do that through the Faith to Faithless programme that Donna has talked a little bit more about. And on the basis of that experience that we have, our team has in that work, we've long advocated for a better understanding and treatment of non-religious people in that system. So it's great to see not just the rigorous evidence base that has been established in this report for that, but some very sound policy recommendations for the way forward. And I think it was good to hear from Lizzi Collinge MP, who's had to go now to her gas and oil debate in the House of Commons, unfortunately, but I think we can understand that. It was great to hear from Lizzi that these policy recommendations are something that at least some parliamentarians will be carrying forward in the context of the current pledged reforms that the government has. Blasphemy laws are in place, or blasphemy or criminalisation of speech on religious matter laws are in place in 91 countries. They affect half the global population. As Lucy said at the beginning of her talk, 12 countries impose the death penalty for apostasy or blasphemy, and dozens more have prison sentences. But this persecution is overlooked and misunderstood often. The findings of this report, as Lucy has said, highlight the systemic and the procedural barriers faced by individuals, policy gaps, guidance gaps, misunderstanding of non-religious belief, of non-religiosity, misunderstanding of apostasy, bias and credibility assessments, and many more. And we're very hopeful that the recommendations that build on such clear and rigorous evidence will see implementation. So we'll come now, because we're very lucky to be joined by Jamie, who has, through his work at Duncan Lewis Solicitors, great specific experience in non-religious asylum claims, as well in general immigration law. So we'll come to him now. But as we do, I'll remind you that it is possible to ask questions. I can't personally see the question and answer button. Oh, now I can, because I've clicked on the right button. So people can, those who are here, do start asking your questions, because otherwise there's a tendency for everyone to ask questions too late, right at the end, because they're thinking of their questions. But don't delay. Put it in the box now, any question that you've had as you've listened to any of our speakers, so that when Jamie has finished giving us his expert view, then we will be able to move straight on to your questions. So Jamie, welcome. I think you're going to speak to us now for 6 to 7 minutes about your own experiences of the sort of cases in practice that Lucy has been talking about in her report.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And it was really good to read Lucy's paper. It's been good to have collaborated on it, and it's very, very, very clear, and like it shows a level of knowledge that most non kind of asylum lawyers don't have. So really, very well done. I would certainly share that to NGOs as well as kind of people working in the firm because I think it's a really, really clear guide. So well done. Um, I think Lucy's asked me to talk a little bit about kind of the current situation. So RE asylum reforms, as well as kind of, I think I'd probably want to move a little bit and talk about reforms post 2022 NABA and talk about the standard of proof and kind of what's been happening with the asylum system under the new Labour government. Um, so, as kind of is a theme for a particular Labour government, the way that they kind of try and show their teeth is by attacking the asylum system. When they took over as government, there was a massive, massive, massive asylum backlog. The previous government had tried to kind of reduce that backlog by doing checklists and questionnaires for countries in which they believe would like to be granted asylum. The Labour government decided to basically streamline the asylum process to reduce the time in interviews, have interviews come quicker, and then asylum decisions would be very, very kind of brief and not kind of engage in the detail of the case. So that meant that kind of complex cases were not given the appropriate scrutiny and kind of the level of decision making has significantly kind of collapsed. Like you get a 7-page decision letter that doesn't really understand the case and just says, well, I'm refusing it because I'm refusing it. Um, and I imagine that there's been a heavy use of AI as well, but we will see kind of that how that kind of comes out in the next couple of years. Um, there's also been a change to the standard of credibility, which I know Lucy covered in her report, but it effectively means that it's maybe slightly more difficult for asylum seekers to prove their claims. So, kind of the consequences of all of this is that complex and claims in which the Home Office can't just tick a checklist are more difficult to prove and are more difficult kind of engaging in the asylum process. So I've never had a non-religious case that hasn't been quite complicated, hasn't required time, hasn't required appropriate witness evidence to make sure that their proper and detailed account is understood. Um, and the changes that have been made recently have basically cut the time the Home Office spend on each asylum claim. I mean that they're less likely to understand complex cases. It's also probably worth noting that given the kind of cuts in legal aid, that most individuals will struggle to find legal aid lawyers or any lawyers whatsoever to be able to help them with their cases. So it just means that the standard of decision making has gone down and the kind of the scope for error has significantly gone up. So I would say that in the last couple of years, it's much more likely that a verifiable and legitimate case would be refused just because there's lack of resources. Um, After that, if an individual has their asylum claim refused and they're given a right of appeal, they then have to navigate the immigration appeal system, which may take 2 to 3 years to get through. So someone who's come to the UK and is seeking protection has to navigate this incredibly arcane and difficult system and put their life on hold for sometimes 3 to 4 years. So, um, as much as obviously we would love for the Home Office to read the recommendations and implement a fairer system both towards non-religious and non and even religious people, the way the Home Office are trying to treat asylum is to reduce costs, reduce time without kind of caring what the actual kind of whether everything is fair or not. Fairness has kind of gone out the window. Um, very, very recently, there have been new reforms that have come in, basically making refugee status temporary. So beforehand, whilst we would be able to advise clients, if you get refugee status, you're here, you're home, you can look forward in your life. Now there's a 13-month temporary status, and there's a 20-year route to settlement as opposed to what was previously 5 years to settlement. Consequences of that are that I mean, the intended consequence of that is that individuals do not feel that the UK is their home, feels that they're here temporarily, and they'll struggle to kind of engage with education, work, and also kind of cultural integration if they know that like they're going to be in a temporary status for 20 years. So it doesn't allow individuals who have come here and have been granted refugee status to have any sense of belonging. And I think that's a really, really shocking and bad thing. The other kind of reform states that every 13 months an individual will need to reapply effectively for their refugee status, for the Home Office able to identify whether they think that that refugee status is still justified. The concern with that is that what I said earlier is that if the Home Office are looking at things with expedition and kind of reduced costs and also reduced numbers of refugees, then any determination they make may not necessarily be fair. So if there is a sweeping assessment that certain countries are safe or certain types of claimants are safe, then that means that they will then have to fight in the appeal courts again and fight for their refugee status. And given the circumstances, they may have to do this 5 times before they were able to achieve settlement. Um, and I think how one would link this to Lucy's research and the report is that individuals who are granted status because they're non-religious, their claims are complicated and they're individualized, and it's more difficult for an individual Home Office decision maker to kind of understand. They don't have significant guidance. They can't follow clear steps as to what to do if they have this type of claim. They have to make the decisions themselves. And that's not a good thing because if they don't have the level of expertise and if then looking at applications with a view to maintaining and granting, but rather reducing, I think you're going to find a lot of individuals when it comes to the 13 months suddenly finding that they receive another poor quality decision that they need to fight again. So that increased time, increased cost in the system, and it increased kind of the lack of the uncertainty that people are going to face going through the asylum system now is pretty appalling. Um, so the new reforms, they will make as much as the Home Office would love to say in 30 months, suddenly Eritrea is going to be safe, or suddenly Iran's going to be safe. The reality is it's just going to be a lot more work for everyone to do. Um, so I would be very concerned that um, there may be sweeping assessments based on country situations saying that, okay, there's a new government, they respect this kind of particular belief system, or alternatively, individualized cases, individuals will struggle to make a Home Office decision maker understand again why is there a granted refugee status and why is that it's still not safe for them, as opposed to looking at the end of 5 years, saying I can get my indefinite leave to remain, and then hopefully achieving citizenship soon thereafter. So I think that's pretty much, unless there's anything else you want me to cover, I think I just wanted to kind of go through. I always come here and talk about the doom that is kind of about to come. I wish I had some positive news, but yeah, every time I do anything with Humanist UK, there's something completely shocking that's happened. So yeah, great.
Jamie, sorry, you mentioned NABA. Could you just explain that for the audience, please?
Um, so that so every single year there's a new Immigration Act. So more than any other kind of field, there's a new Immigration Act. The 2022 NABA Act was basically um a reaction by the previous government to suggest too many people were granted refugee status and that the system could be gamed by people. So I think the primary kind of, for the focus of Lucy's report and kind of this thing, the main thing was about the standard of proof, which I know that you've gone over in your report, but it's basically kind of increasing what an individual needs to do to prove their case, mean that there's more kind of there's more pressure on them to provide particular details, and it just means that like whilst previously it was a very low standard of proof that they could rely on, that it was just kind of balanced probabilities. Now it's slightly higher, um, and there's more for them to prove and more for them to say. So whilst before that the benefit of the doubt was supposed to be given to asylum seekers, it's kind of a move towards saying that the benefit of the doubt should be moved somewhat, and it should be more difficult for asylum seekers to prove their case. And the more complicated your case is, the more difficult it is for you to prove to begin
Thank you
with.
very much, Lucy. Thank you very much, Jamie, Donna, and Lizzie, although she's gone. Thank you to everyone who's attended, all the panelists, all the participants. Thank you also for the work that everyone on this panel and many of those who are watching are doing in this important area of human rights. In difficult times, of course, things can seem dark, as Jamie said at the beginning, but everyone here is making a contribution to a more hopeful world. So thank you very much for that. That struggle continues, and I'll see you next time.
Great. Thanks so much. Bye.